Well, for more on this, we are joined by Syrian Islamic scholar Muhammad al-Yaqoubi. Thank you so much for coming in. I just want to get your general feeling on, first, this ceasefire and the peace talks that were set to follow. Do you hold out much hope that either or both will succeed?
Well, the start point of hopes is the ceasefire. I tweeted, I consider that a great win for the Syrian people, a great win for the innocent people who have nothing to do with this fighting. Syrian people have suffered a lot through the past decades, but the suffering increased a lot now with the bombings and the fighting. So a ceasefire is a must. Stop the bloodshed. It's a great win.
But we're hearing that there have been numerous violations, and we just heard there from the Syrian opposition spokesperson that they are now refusing to participate in the peace talks that were set to follow in Astana in the coming weeks. Do you feel for them? Do you agree that they should pull out of these talks? Is that justified?
Well, is this a tactic or a strategic position? If it's a tactic, yes, because the regime has to make Syrian regime has to make some concessions when sitting at the negotiating table. Assad regime has no future in Syria. Everyone knows this. Now, the point is how to get to that point. The Syrian opposition also has to be convinced that war is not the means to reach that point. Now, we've been fighting for over 5 years. We reached nowhere. We lost 500,000 people, innocent people, so many injured people. The tragedy of the Syrian people probably is the tragedy of this century. So I encourage the opposition to go for negotiations, but again, there should be some leverage and pressure on the Syrian regime to make some concessions, at least start releasing political prisoners, kidnapped people from both sides.
But while you say there is no future for Bashar al-Assad, the main parties backing the negotiations on behalf of the Syrian regime feel he does have a future in the country. How far do you believe these talks can get when Turkey will not agree to include Assad and Russia says that he must be included?
Well, we must negotiate with the devil. So negotiating with the Assad, if included, now in order to set a timetable for, let's say, handing over his authorities to an interim government. By the end, everyone knows, with or against Assad, that Assad lost the battle, he has no future. There should be now an opportunity for the Syrian people to enjoy peace in Syria, rebuilding the country, uniting the Syrians. This is one important point here, which is we're missing, uniting the Syrian people together against extremism and terrorism.
That's the ultimate challenge, though. Uniting the people, given what the dynamics of the battleground right now are, it is very difficult to distinguish between who's fighting for what their interests actually are, who wants real democracy from Syria. A number of people now say that the so-called opposition forces that are more secular in interests have actually been infiltrated by jihadis. Does it concern you that the dynamics on the battlefield are that convoluted now that it makes it almost impossible to try and negotiate with these various groups to bring peace?
It does. To be honest, if I may just speak on behalf of the Syrian people, they feel their voice is not represented. People in the opposition, to a large extent, people fighting on the ground, the militia fighting on the ground, everyone has an agenda. The Syrian people need peace. They need freedom. They fought for dignity. They did not fight for an Islamic state, according to the version which so-called jihadis are bringing from across the world. They did not fight for people's own interests or the interests of this country or that country. They fought for freedom and dignity, and I believe we should have the voice of the Syrian people represented on any negotiating table.
So I'll ask you what may sound like a naive hypothetical right now. If you held the proverbial magic wand to help end this conflict, what would you do? Who would you place where? Whom would you give voices to? Who would be doing this negotiating?
Well, this is a very difficult position. And at the same time, you need people who are fighting on the ground to negotiate. So ultimately, I encourage all of these moderate fighting groups to come to the negotiating table because they have guns. The Syrian people are victims of the bullets and bombs. So they have to come to the negotiating table. And of course, the Assad regime has to sit at the negotiating table, and we have to reach an agreement where everyone makes some concessions and gives in something. We come to a common ground where gradually, if we agreed on this and made some concessions, I believe a couple of years ago, we would have seen Syria now without the Assad regime and probably without many of the extremist groups.
Okay. Muhammad al-Yaqoubi, unfortunately, that's all the time we have. I'd like to thank you so much for coming in and sharing
Thank you very
your
much.
insight.